Okay, so shouldn't it be easy just to stick to the history of the Odyssey? And the answer is what history? I mean, really, if we're going to think about it for a second here, um, what is indeed the Odyssey? Uh, what indeed is its predecessor, the Iliad? Well, these are literal epic poems. In fact, they're the origin of the name of the descriptor epic, or at least these kinds of poems in general. Uh, and the thing about that is, epic poem was it? Was it? Was Homer just kind of doing his bit as a 12th century BC wolf blitzer on the ancient Mycenaean Greek version of Wolf Blitzer on CNN? Uh, no, no. Um, this is this is. I think if you want a good approximation, the best you could hope for in terms of historical accuracy for Homer, who wrote in the you know 800s BC, if he ever existed in the first place. Um, it's about you remember the movie, the Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot, that Roland Emmerich film from 2000, um, where he plays that Revolutionary War um, soldier and leader, and basically kills somebody with or at least kills a horse with a flag. That's about the extent to which you that would be the best you could hope for historical accuracy from um from Homer, because he's talking about 300, 400 years after the fact. That's his relationship in time to the period of the actual events of the Trojan War. You know, and I'm reading this, I'm researching this, trying to respond to somebody on the question of what does historical accuracy mean in terms of these epic poems, and it's like, do we know that Agamemnon existed? Do we know that Helen of Troy existed? Do we know that of Paris and King Priam and all the rest of these people? Do we know they existed? Nah, we don't actually know that they even existed. That there could be people who existed who are the basis of these characters, and there may indeed have been a real Achilles, a real Agamemnon, and other folks like that, but there's just simply no record of it. And without a record, you don't really have history. At best, you might have an oral history, but that can be like, pardon me, but that can be like way off, especially after 2 or 3 centuries worth of time. And that is not to say that we got a manuscript off of Homer, the full epic poem written down. We're not. I don't think we're even sure that Homer wrote anything. This is spoken. He was a guy who did a lot of spoken performances. Something sung and or rapped basically. But it's like passed on by word of mouth, and then eventually somebody writes it down, and it becomes quite a classic for people in the Greek world, which is one of the reasons why we still have it around to begin with, because it was a bestseller of a sort. But again, we don't know whether the events are real. We don't know whether the people are real. We know Troy was real and that it was kind of destroyed around that time. We don't know how long exactly the war went on. The story says 10 years, but who knows, how long it might have taken. Um we we serve no generalities. We have some idea of what Mycenaean Greek might have been like. We have some idea of what their writing system was like. Um, we have some idea of the general situation, and that there was this big old collapse of, you know, across the Bronze Age world, the Bronze Age Mediterranean especially. There was some sort of collapse that basically meant that the region devolved into a whole bunch of warfare and such. And out of that came a reorganization that led to the more modern Greek of the classical period, and so on and so forth. But it's sort of like we're being asked to be historically accurate, but historically accurate to what? So even by the time we're listening to this as a Greek audience, we're 2 or 300 years in the future of the um, kingdom that we're talking about. The members of and what they did and did not do. We're 300 years, uh, you know, ahead of that in their future, and things haven't been passed down by written accounts, at least not the way in any way that's been preserved. It's instead been passed down by of mouth, and there may be decades or even centuries worth of word of mouth still in the epic poems, in the epic poems future. So i- people talk about historical accuracy with this, but it's sort of like, what are we trying to be accurate to? I mean, do the uh, you might do the armor, and but the armor is not going to look particularly Greek. It's going to look like something out of like little chips brought together. I mean, and you can do that, but it's like I think at a certain point, um, Christopher Nolan decided that if there was no being accurate, it was perhaps instead more important to be meaningful. And so he did the opposite of I think he did the opposite of what Troy did. The early 2000s um, film with Brad Pitt and Eric Bana and Orlando Bloom and really an all-star cast. And it's like, y- what are we being accurate to? These characters are lost to history, lost to mythology. We have a character where history would have a person. And I know there are folks who would say, okay, we want to have the correct ethnicity for these people. When did that become a concern? When did that become so freaking important? Was it after all the times in which we taunted, the left wing commenters taunted people over? Okay, your ancient Greeks are being played by people who are mainly Northern Europeans and Germans and Scots, Irish, and all that stuff. So it's sort of like, okay, what are we being accurate to? You get to a point, I think, after a while of oral transmission of story told by word of mouth again and again. I think you get to a point where it becomes its own kind of fiction. And I think when it reaches that point, it's more about what the meaning of the story is than what the details were about how things actually happened. Because if we got a time machine and actually discovered what was really going on, I think we would reach a point where it'd be like, oh, okay, this is kind of very disappointing, or even shocking that it went a certain way. So I guess this is part of the problem with dealing with fiction as if it's got to be, because what is fiction? Fiction isn't having real events. Fiction is having a kind of matrix of a set of unreal events that you've put together, and it may be made to resemble reality, but look deep enough under the surface and you'll find that there is no reality there. And people go, oh, we're lost then. How can we tell what's right or wrong? Well, it's not so much right and wrong at that point. It's more like a kind of it's a question of, are you okay with the changes, or are you willing to suspend disbelief for this particular diversion here. So it's like, what are we trying to be accurate to? When we People talk about book accuracy these days, they they Pasha actually getting facts and reality and news stories accurate. They don't seem to care about that. They're more care they care more about what the message is. They care more about what their political interest is. So I guess this is, you know, in saner times, I think this movie would have been left alone, by those sorts of people. I think they would have just said it's only a movie. Nowadays, the refrain is, we have to prevent wokeness. We have to destroy, we must make sure that going woke means going broke. And it's like, this is expending a lot of effort to do something that ultimately will end up being very pointless. So it's like, I look at all they're doing to try and stop it, to try and derail it, to make it a flop, and it's like, what are you actually doing? And are you actually getting to see the film? And if you see the film, are you actually opening yourself up to the experience, or are you just instead kind of going in with all these expectations and going, aha, this expectation has been met? I was right to hate it. But it's like that kind of viewing. Oh boy, that looks like it fixed it. But it's I guess what I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to fiction, there are no fixed points. Everything is a relative matrix of, that you can have a fictionalized version of a real event, of course, but it will always retain that fictionalized nature. And if it's far enough back, very often it's like, what exactly are you going to get right? What exactly is going to be appropriate? So, but my philosophy in general is, so long as you're honest with people about the fact that you're doing a lot of these alterations, that it's not really intended to be a historically accurate record, as long as you're honest with that, I think people should have the freedom to do that. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be liked by everybody, but that's what fiction is like. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, you don't. Mm, but it's, yeah, I'm beginning to nod off. That's obvious. The thing about all this canon and lore stuff is that it's all about, you're trying, you're just basically trying to create the semblance of fixed points of events that can be agreed on within the story universe occurred. And when we're looking at Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, we're not looking at something that was written with some show Bible in mind. No, we're looking at something that has been tumbled around like a rock in one of those rock tumblers, tumbled around so much that it's become this very smooth gem-like stone. And there's not much you can really do to restore it to what it used to be. But it's like, I mean, people cheered on and gave Academy Awards to a. I mean, you want historical inaccuracy? Let's go with Commodus. Commodus was not clean shaven. He wore a beard. He also didn't die in the arena with a knife pushed through his throat, like he did in at the end of Gladiator. No, he was strangled in the bath. So, so much for that. Yeah, I think my message would be sometimes historical accuracy matters. And in the case of the Iliad and in the Odyssey, we're dealing with stuff that is so ancient, even compared to the time period of the composition, much less our own time period. Things that are so ancient that they've lost that connection to culture, to older things. And so it's like, what are you expecting? So that's my thought on this for tonight. So y'all have a good night.